The cold night air bit sharply at the edges of the dense forest, where shadows tangled like secrets among the trees. Somewhere, deep within the underbrush, a low, confused howl pierced the silence. Not quite a dog's bark, not quite a wolf's call. The moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow over a small clearing where 3 dogs lay sprawled in uneasy slumber, their breaths clouding in the chill as a strange figure stirred between them. He wasn't quite like the others. Taller, leaner, with eyes that shimmered with wild intelligence and a flicker of something lost. The wolf pup shifted awkwardly, his paws tangled in the soft earth, his breath coming in ragged pants. From a distance, it was easy to mistake him for one of the dogs, but the subtle differences betrayed him, the way his ears twitched at unfamiliar sounds, the way his tail flicked uncertainly, never quite settling into the wagging rhythm of his companions. The 3 dogs shifted, nudging him gently with noses and paws, their movements protective but cautious. They had taken him in when he was nothing more than a shivering bundle, abandoned and alone. Their pack had grown in an unexpected way, and though they didn't fully understand what he was, they accepted him as one of their own. Or so they thought. Tonight, as the wind whispered through the branches, carrying distant echoes of something unseen, the atmosphere felt charged, as if the very forest was holding its breath. The dogs' usual easy camaraderie was tinged with a strange tension, their eyes flickering toward the wolf pup, with a mixture of affection and uncertainty. He, in turn, seemed restless, caught between instincts he couldn't name, and the warmth of the pack that had become his family. A sudden rustle in the brush made all 4 freeze, ears pricked and bodies taut. The moonlight caught the glint of wild eyes watching from the shadows, eyes that belonged to a world the pup had never truly known, a world that was about to reclaim him in ways no one could have imagined. In that suspended moment, the fragile peace teetered on the edge of something raw and unstoppable, leaving the night heavy with questions no one dared to ask aloud. The forest, vast and ancient, stretched endlessly beyond the clearing, its dense canopy woven with branches that whispered secrets older than memory. This was no ordinary place, but a realm where wildness breathed in every leaf and stone, where survival was etched into the soil beneath paw and claw. The 3 dogs, Luna, a sleek black shepherd with eyes like molten amber, Max, a grizzled golden retriever whose muzzle was flecked with silver, and Bella, a sprightly border collie with sharp, watchful gaze, had long called this forest home. Their lives were shaped by its rhythms, the rustling of leaves in the dawn breeze, the distant calls of birds, the scent of earth after rain. They hunted, rested, and roamed as a pack, bound by more than blood, a bond forged in countless shared days and nights. Into this delicate balance had come the wolf pup, whom they named Coda. Found alone and trembling beneath an ancient oak, his fur matted and eyes wide with confusion, Coda had been a mystery from the start. He carried the wildness of the forest in his bones, yet the warmth of the dog's affection knitted him into their fold. They had raised him with gentle nudges and patient lessons, teaching him to chase shadows and bark at the moon, to trust in the safety of the pack. And for a time, it seemed he belonged, but belonging was never simple. Coda's presence stirred ripples beneath the surface, subtle and hard to name. Luna, ever the guardian, bore a quiet wariness in her gaze. She would watch Coda with a careful intensity, her posture taut beneath the moonlight, as if sensing a restlessness the others overlooked. Max, whose patience was as vast as the forest itself, sometimes found his growls more frequent, low, uncertain sounds that hinted at unease. Bella, the keenest observer, caught fleeting moments when Coda's eyes flickered with something untamed, a glimmer of a life beyond the pack's gentle rules. The tension was less in words and more in the silences between them, in the way the forest seemed to hold its breath around Coda. Sometimes during their nightly rests, the pup would lie apart, paws twitching as if chasing dreams too wild to name. His breathing would quicken, and his ears would prick at distant, unheard sounds, calls from the depths of the woods that no dog could understand. He tried to mimic the dog's play, the wagging of tails, the easy camaraderie. But there was always a hesitation, a gap between impulse and action that set him apart. The dogs noticed these moments, though they rarely spoke of them. Their own histories were tinged with loss and survival. Luna had once been separated from her litter. Max had fought through years of hardship before finding this pack, and Bella carried scars from a life on the edge. They knew what it meant to carry pain beneath the surface, but Coda's was different, an echo of wildness that neither fully grasped nor could soothe. One evening, as twilight melted into night, the pack sat quietly by a small stream, the water's murmur threading through the stillness. The moon's reflection shimmered on the ripples, fractured and shifting like the emotions tangled within the group. Coda padded closer to Luna, who lay with her head resting on her paws, eyes fixed on the dark woods beyond. He nuzzled her gently, seeking reassurance, but Luna's tail flicked with a subtle tension. She let out a soft sigh, a breath heavy with unspoken worries. Max watched from a distance, his gaze shadowed. He remembered the first time they'd found Coda alone, the fear in those wild eyes, the instinct to protect battling against the suspicion that lingered deep within. Could a wolf truly be part of their pack? Was the wildness in Coda a threat or a gift? These questions gnawed quietly beneath the surface of their daily lives. Bella, ever alert, caught a movement in the shadows, something flickering just beyond the trees, a silhouette that belonged not to dog or man, but to the forest itself. She stiffened, a prickle of unease rising along her spine. The pack's sanctuary felt fragile tonight, as if the very air carried a warning. Coda's ears twitched, his body taut, caught between the comfort of the pack and the pull of a world he barely understood. In that moment, the forest seemed to breathe with them, alive, watchful and waiting. And as the moon traced silver paths across the clearing, the invisible threads of belonging, wildness and uncertainty wove tighter around them all. The question hung quietly but insistently. Could Coda ever truly be one of them? Or was the call of the wild too strong to ignore? The answer lay just beyond the reach of the night, waiting to unfold. The night deepened, folding the forest into a cloak of shadows that seemed to press closer with each passing hour. Coda lay curled at the edge of the clearing, his body tense despite the calm that surrounded him. His breath came in shallow bursts, the rhythm uneven like a heartbeat struggling to find its pace. Around him, the pack's steady presence was a balm, yet an invisible barrier held him apart, a quiet boundary he both longed to cross and feared to breach. Luna stirred beside him, her ears flicking as she caught a faint rustle from the thicket beyond their sight. She rose slowly, muscles coiling beneath her sleek fur, eyes narrowing against the moon's silver wash. Her instinct was sharp, a guardian's vigilance sharpened by years of solitude and survival. Yet tonight, something in her glimmered with hesitation, a hesitation that unsettled the subtle balance they had maintained. Instead of the usual protective stance, her movements carried a strange reluctance, as if an unseen weight pressed against the lines she'd drawn around the pack. Coda's gaze followed her, curious and wary. He caught the curve of her lips, half a snarl, half an apology, and the flicker of something unspoken in her amber eyes. His own instincts stirred uneasily, a discordant melody beneath the surface of his canine mimicry. He wanted to trust, to lean into the warmth of their acceptance, but fragments of a deeper calling whispered through his bones, calls he neither understood nor dared to answer. Max shifted nearby, his grizzled frame casting a long shadow across the clearing. His eyes, clouded with age yet still sharp, watched Coda with a mixture of protectiveness and unresolved doubt. The older dog's growl was low, almost imperceptible, vibrating through the cold air like a warning half-formed. Max's usual calm fractured in moments when Coda's wildness surfaced, those sudden bursts of speed, the silent, stalking posture that betrayed the wolf beneath the surface. Tonight, Max's gaze lingered longer, a restless edge beneath the surface, as if wrestling with a truth he couldn't voice. Bella, ever alert, prowled the perimeter, her lithe body taut and ready. Her sharp eyes caught every flicker of movement, every whisper of sound, but her attention kept drifting back to Coda. She noticed the subtle twitch of his tail when the wind shifted, the way his ears flattened briefly before rising again, like fragments of a language she couldn't quite translate. There was a tension in her posture, a cautious curiosity that mingled with an undercurrent of unease. She wanted to bridge the gap between them, to understand the riddle he embodied, but each attempt was met with a flicker of something elusive, slipping just beyond her reach. Coda rose suddenly, his body coiling with restless energy. The pack's quiet stirred around him like a held breath, and for a moment, the forest seemed to pause, trees standing sentinel in the stillness, the air thick with anticipation. He moved toward the shadowed edge where the trees grew denser, the scent of moss and earth richer there. His paws pressed into the soft soil, and a distant sound, soft, haunting, threaded through the night. It was a call, or perhaps a whisper, that tugged at something deep inside him, stirring memories that were not his own, but felt as real as his heartbeat. Luna's voice cut through the silence, low and steady, but edged with an urgency that unsettled the pack. "Coda, come back!" Her words were both command and plea, carrying the weight of unspoken fears. Coda hesitated, the pull of the unknown against the warmth of the pack's bond. His eyes flicked back to her, the familiar shapes of the dogs who had raised him, their faces etched with concern and something more fragile, hope tinged with doubt. Max's growl deepened, a rumble beneath the earth that seemed to echo from the roots of the forest itself. It was a sound that spoke of boundaries, of lines drawn in the soil between belonging and wildness. Bella's gaze followed the tension threading through the clearing, her body coiling with a restless energy that mirrored Coda's own turmoil. In that charged moment, a sudden rustle broke the fragile stillness, closer this time, urgent and sharp. All four sets of eyes snapped to the source, hearts pounding in a rhythm synchronized with the night's pulse. Coda's ears flattened, nostrils flaring as the scent of something unfamiliar brushed against the edges of his senses. It was neither friend nor foe, but a presence that unsettled the pack's fragile equilibrium. The forest seemed to lean in, waiting. The threads of loyalty, instinct, and uncertainty wove tighter, binding the pack in a silent tension that stretched between them like a fragile web. Coda's wild heart beat against the cage of his upbringing, each pulse a reminder of the wildness he could no longer deny, and the family he feared to lose. As the moon's light shifted, casting long shadows that danced on the edge of the clearing, the night held its breath once more. In the quiet between heartbeats, the question hung, unspoken, unresolved, but impossible to ignore. What path would Coda choose when the world he'd been raised in and the wild calling inside him finally collided? The rustle in the underbrush grew louder, sharper. No longer a distant whisper, but a tangible presence pressing into the clearing's fragile calm. Luna's fur bristled as she stepped forward, muscles taut beneath her sleek coat, eyes narrowing into slits that caught every flicker of movement. Max's growl deepened, reverberating through the cold night air like a warning drumbeat, while Bella circled, her gaze darting between shadow and light, alert to every nuance. Coda stood frozen, ears pricked high, nostrils flaring as he tried to decipher the scent that had invaded their sanctuary. It was unfamiliar, earthy, damp, and tinged with something metallic. His heart pounded, not with the wild call he'd learned to expect, but with a sudden, sharp pang of fear that was new and raw. From the thicket emerged a figure, not a creature of the forest, but a man. His clothes were worn and dirt-streaked, his eyes wide with exhaustion and something unreadable, something desperate. In his hand, he clutched a makeshift cage, battered and crooked, its door hanging askew as if hastily abandoned. The man's breath came in ragged gasps, his gaze flickering between the dogs and the wolf pup with a mixture of awe and dread. Luna growled low, a sound that rippled through the pack like a warning bell, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he dropped to his knees, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please," he rasped, voice cracked and raw. "He's not safe out here. Not alone." Max's eyes darkened with suspicion. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice rough and edged with warning. The man swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Coda. "My name's Thomas. I was tracking him. He escaped from a research facility nearby. They were trying to study him, keep him contained. But he's wild. He doesn't belong in cages." Bella's sharp gaze locked onto Coda, who took a hesitant step back, his body coiling with conflicting impulses. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not of the man, but of something else. A memory. a trace buried deep beneath the pack's warmth, a hint of a different life that had nothing to do with playful chases or quiet nights by the stream. "This changes everything," Luna murmured, stepping closer to the man as if to shield Coda from the weight of this revelation. Thomas nodded, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "I followed him here, knowing he might find others like you, dogs who'd taken him in. But the truth is, he's not just a wolf pup raised by dogs. He's part of an experiment, a hybrid. They've been trying to blend traits, control instincts. He's alive because he escaped, but they'll come back." A heavy silence fell over the clearing. The forest seemed to grow colder, the night's embrace tightening around them all. Coda's eyes searched the faces of Luna, Max, and Bella, the pack that had been his world. The revelation shattered something fundamental, not just about who he was, but about the very safety they'd believed they shared. Max growled again, this time with a sharper edge. "So this whole time, he's been running from people who see him as less than a creature deserving freedom, like something to be controlled." Thomas's nod was grim. "Exactly. And they won't stop. If they catch him, it won't be for his good. He's more than wildness. They want to use him." Coda lowered his head, ears flattening, as a storm of emotions roiled beneath his fur. Fear, confusion, anger. He had thought the pack was his home, his sanctuary, but now the boundaries shifted beneath him like treacherous ice. The warmth of belonging clashed violently with the cold reality of the man's words. Luna stepped forward, placing a firm paw on Coda's shoulder. "We protect our own," she said, voice steady but fierce. "No matter what they say, no matter what they want, you're part of this pack." Bella circled the man, eyes narrowing. "But what do we do now? We can't just hide forever." Thomas looked up at the moon, its silvery light casting long shadows across his worn face. "They have resources, tracking devices, people who won't stop until they find him. We need to move, to disappear, to find a place where no one can reach him." Max's gaze flickered to Coda, then back to Luna. "We've faced dangers before, but this is different. It's not just about survival in the wild. It's about fighting against a force that sees him as an object, not as a living being." Coda's tail twitched, a subtle sign of his turmoil. The man's presence, the revelation of his true origins, had opened a chasm within him, a divide between the life he'd known and the harsh reality waiting beyond the forest's edge. As the wind carried the scent of pine and earth, the pack gathered closer, their bond tightening in the face of this new threat. Luna's eyes glinted with resolve. "We'll stand with you, Coda, but you have to be ready. The world outside this forest is not kind to those who don't fit its boxes." The night held them in its shadowy embrace as Thomas reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, battered map marked with scrawled notes and crossed-out paths. "There's a safe place," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Far from here. If we can get him there, maybe he can live free." Coda's gaze lingered on the map, then rose to meet the eyes of his pack, dogs who had raised him, loved him, and now faced a future fraught with danger and uncertainty alongside him. For the first time, the wild call inside him seemed less like a distant echo and more like a summons to action. His journey was no longer just about belonging. It was about survival, freedom, and defying a world that sought to cage his very nature. The forest around them seemed to exhale, the stillness broken by the low rumble of determination rising within the pack. They were no longer just dogs raising a wolf pup. They were a family standing at the edge of a storm, ready to face whatever came next. And in that charged silence, beneath the cold gaze of the moon, a new chapter began, one where the lines between wild and tame blurred, and the true test of loyalty and courage awaited them all. The clearing fell into a heavy stillness after Thomas's words hung in the cool night air, thick as the mist curling low over the forest floor. The pack's breaths came unevenly, a chorus of quiet gasps and suppressed sighs, the weight of the revelation settling in like a dense fog, obscuring the familiar shapes of their world. Luna's amber eyes glinted with fierce loyalty, but beneath that fire, a flicker of uncertainty trembled. She lowered her head slowly, lips parting just enough to exhale a breath that mingled with the night, as if trying to dispel a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Koda's body remained rigid, his muscles taut like a bowstring pulled tight. His eyes, wide and unreadable, darted toward the man, then back to his packmates. The familiar warmth of their presence felt distant, like a fading echo underwater. Comfort mingled with confusion, a fragile tether to a past now fractured. He swallowed hard, tongue wetting parched lips as a shiver ran along his spine, though the air was still. The pieces of his identity, so long woven together in the quiet rhythm of this forest life, now seemed jagged, edges sharp against his skin. Max's grizzled frame shifted, the gravelly growl he had released moments ago fading into a low rumble, more rumination than warning. His gaze bore into Koda with an intensity that was almost painful, an unspoken question tangled with a silent plea for understanding. The older dog's eyes flickered with memories of battles fought and losses grieved, a lifetime spent guarding not just territory, but trust. Now, with this new truth, the foundation beneath him felt uncertain. Max's paws moved restlessly, scraping at the earth in a nervous rhythm, as if trying to ground himself amid the shifting sands. Bella's sharp gaze softened, but only just. She circled slowly, the soft padding of her steps barely breaking the heavy silence. Her eyes caught Koda's again, searching, seeking a glimpse of the pup she thought she knew. The wolf within him was not new, but the knowledge of his origins cast a long shadow over the trust they'd built. Her tail twitched with tension, a subtle signal of unease that betrayed the calm she worked so hard to maintain. Bella's ears flattened briefly, flicking back as if warding off a storm she could neither predict nor control. Koda's breath hitched, the sudden catch sharp and raw. His gaze dropped to the ground, nostrils flaring as memories flickered unbidden. Fragments of sterile rooms, cold metal cages, and distant voices muffled by fear. The scent of antiseptic, faint but persistent, clawed at the edges of his mind. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to dislodge the ghosts that haunted the space between past and present. His paws trembled, the earth beneath them suddenly unfamiliar and unstable. Luna's paw brushed gently against Koda's shoulder, a touch both grounding and tentative. Her eyes met his, searching for a response, a sign that the pup who had become part of their pack was still there beneath the storm of revelation. "We don't have to face this alone," she murmured, voice low and steady but threaded with a fragile hope. "You're one of us. That's what matters." Koda's lips parted, a soft whimper escaping before he could stop it, a sound raw with vulnerability, the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears, the wildness and the warmth inside him colliding in turbulent waves. The notion of belonging, once a certainty, now felt like a fragile thread stretched thin across a widening chasm. He wanted to reach out, to anchor himself in the pack's steadfast devotion, but the truth gnawed at him, whispering that perhaps he was too different, too marked by the past, to truly fit. Max took a slow, measured step forward, the creak of his joints a reminder of the years etched into his frame. "This world," he said quietly, voice rough but kind, "hasn't been kind to those who don't fit its rules, but you've got us now. And we'll fight for you, even if the odds are against us." Koda's ears twitched, a flicker of something fierce and resolute sparking within. Yet the fear lingered, a shadow that clung stubbornly to the edges of his spirit. The idea of escape, of a life free from cages and cruel hands, seemed both a distant dream and an urgent necessity. His tail flicked uncertainly, a silent question hanging between the hard lines of survival and the soft edges of hope. Bella sat down slowly nearby, her gaze tracing the patterns of moonlight filtering through the leaves. "I keep thinking about the nights we spent teaching you the pack's ways," she said, voice almost a whisper. "How you learned to chase, to bark, to trust. What if all of that was just a mask? What if you're meant for something more complicated?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Koda's eyes met Bella's, a flicker of pain flashing there before he looked away. The thought unsettled him deeply. Was he a wolf who had learned to be a dog, or something else entirely? The question unsettled the pack's fragile equilibrium, sowing seeds of doubt that tangled with the roots of their connection. Thomas watched silently, exhaustion and empathy etched into every line of his face. He glanced down at the battered map in his hands, then back to Coda. "You're not alone in this," he said, voice steady but gentle. "Whatever you are, whatever they say, you have a chance. Here, with them. You're not just a subject of their experiments. You're a living being with a story that's still being written." Coda's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths as he fought to absorb the weight of those words. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the night air still and heavy, mirroring the storm inside his heart. His thoughts spiraled. What did freedom truly mean? Was it the absence of cages, or the presence of acceptance? Could the pack's love be enough to bridge the gap between the wild he was born from and the family he had found? The moonlight shifted, casting long, wavering shadows that stretched like fingers across the clearing. The quiet crackle of leaves underfoot, the distant hoot of an owl, all felt amplified in the charged silence. Coda's paws itched to move, to run towards some unknown horizon, yet a deep, unspoken tether held him rooted where he stood. Luna's voice broke the silence again, softer this time, a balm against the raw edges of uncertainty. "We'll face this day by day, together, no matter what comes." Coda nodded slowly, a flicker of determination sparking amid the turmoil. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but in that moment, surrounded by the pack's unwavering presence, he allowed himself a fragile hope. The wild call inside him had shifted. It was no longer just a distant echo, but a pulse that beat alongside the love and loyalty that had become his true home. And though the night still held its shadows, within Coda, something had irrevocably changed. The journey ahead would test every part of him, but for the first time, he understood that identity was not just about where you came from, it was about who you chose to become. The forest had quieted, the earlier rustles and murmurs fading into a dense silence that pressed against Coda's senses like a heavy cloak. He sat alone at the edge of the clearing, the moonlight filtering through the leaves above, casting mottled shadows that danced slowly across the uneven ground. The familiar smell of pine and damp earth surrounded him, a scent that once brought comfort, now tangled with something unfamiliar, like a ghost whispering just beyond reach. His breath came slow and shallow, the steady rhythm of the pack's presence gone for the moment. The absence felt like a chasm, exposing the raw edges of a heart caught between worlds. He lowered his head, eyes fixed on the scattering of fallen leaves at his paws. Each one seemed to carry a story, a memory, a fragment of a past he barely understood but could no longer ignore. Within the stillness, the voices of doubt rose unbidden. They tangled with the pulsing beat of his wild blood, threading through his thoughts with relentless persistence. Who was he, truly? A wolf raised by dogs, or a creature of something altogether different? The man's words echoed in his mind: hybrid, experiment, escape. Labels that felt both alien and suffocating, like chains forged from invisible steel. Coda's claws scraped the earth absent-mindedly, tracing patterns in the soil as images flickered behind his eyes. Sterile rooms bathed in harsh artificial light, cold metal bars enclosing shadows that mirrored his own confusion. The scent of antiseptic lingered in those memories, sharp and biting, stirring a sudden wave of unease that made his muscles tense. He swallowed hard, the taste bitter and strange, as if the past had reached through time to claim him once again. The warmth of the pack, the gentle nudge of Luna's paw, Max's steady presence, Bella's searching gaze, felt distant now, like a half-remembered dream slipping through his grasp. Could he still belong here, or was he forever marked by the truth he'd uncovered? A fragile flicker of guilt crept in, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. He thought of the dogs who had raised him, who had shown him kindness when the world had offered only cold indifference. Were they deceived by a mask he wore? Had he been living a lie, pretending to be one of them, while something untamed clawed beneath the surface? The thought was a sharp thorn, piercing through the fragile comfort he'd known. Yet with that guilt came relief, a strange, paradoxical easing of the tension that had bound him so tightly. At last, the pieces of his fractured identity began to align, however imperfectly. The wildness inside him was not a shadow to be hidden or a secret to be feared, but a part of himself that demanded recognition. To deny it was to deny the very core of who he was. The moon shifted slowly overhead, casting long silver beams that caught the tremor in his fur. The night air carried the faint rustle of distant leaves, a soft, almost musical reminder that life pulsed beyond the confines of uncertainty. Koda closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound cradle him in its gentle rhythm, a lullaby for a soul adrift. Memories surfaced like fragments of a broken mirror, glittering with shards of joy and pain. He recalled the first time Bella had taught him to chase shadows, her laughter ringing clear and light as she darted through the trees. Max's patient eyes, steady as the earth beneath his paws, had offered silent lessons in endurance and trust. Luna's fierce protectiveness had been a beacon in the darkest nights, a promise that no matter the storms, he was not alone. But beneath those memories lay another layer, more elusive, more fragile, a fleeting image of a face glimpsed through bars, a voice muffled but urgent, a touch that had trembled with both fear and hope. The ties that bound him to the pack were deep, but so too was the legacy that pulsed beneath his skin, a legacy forged in places he had yet to understand. The weight of contradictions settled over him like a twilight fog. He was both wolf and dog, captive and free, outsider and family. Each identity tugged at his heartstrings with equal force, weaving a tapestry of confusion and longing that refused to unravel neatly. The borders he had once believed were clear had blurred into a landscape of shifting shadows and half-truths. In the silence, Koda's thoughts spiraled, circling the questions without answers. Could he reconcile the wildness inside with the love he'd found? Was it possible to be both fierce and gentle, to belong fully in a world that seemed determined to separate him from himself? The path ahead was obscured, a maze of uncertainty, where every step carried the risk of losing what little certainty remained. His eyes opened to the moonlit clearing once more, the familiar shapes of trees standing sentinel in the darkness. The night seemed to hold its breath alongside him, the stillness amplifying the tremors within his soul. He felt the pulse of life beneath his paws, the earth's quiet heartbeat, steady and unyielding, a reminder of the strength that lay hidden in stillness. Koda rose slowly, the movement deliberate and unhurried, as if seeking balance in the shifting tides of his emotions. He paced a small circle, tail flicking uncertainly, nostrils flaring as he breathed in the scents of the forest, the musk of pine needles, the dampness of moss, the faint trace of distant rain. Each scent carried a memory, a whisper of belonging, a thread tying him to this place and the pack that had become his family. Yet even as the night wrapped around him like a familiar shawl, the shadows within remained restless. The questions lingered not as threats, but as invitations to deeper understanding. Koda knew, with a quiet certainty that unsettled and soothed in equal measure, that he could never return to the innocence of before. The truth had shifted the ground beneath his paws, and the journey toward himself had only just begun. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, gazing up at the moon's pale face. Its light was cool, distant, yet unwavering, a silent witness to the storms within, and the fragile hope that flickered like a flame against the dark. In that moment, Koda allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he was, a creature caught between worlds, carrying both the wild and the tame, the past and the future, the fear and the fierce, unyielding hope for a place to call home. And in the quiet of that night, beneath the watchful gaze of stars, the beginning of a new understanding stirred deep inside him, a still, steady flame that would guide him through the shadows yet to come. The wind shifted suddenly, a sharp gust that rattled the branches above, sending a cascade of brittle leaves swirling through the clearing like restless spirits. The night pressed in closer, the dense forest around them growing darker, more claustrophobic, as if the trees themselves were leaning in to listen, to witness the unraveling of something long held at bay. Koda stood rigid, muscles taut beneath his fur, eyes darting toward every flicker of shadow beyond the circle of moonlight. The fragile calm he had sought in the solitude of the clearing shattered in an instant. "Did you hear that?" Bella's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and breathless. She was crouched low, tail flicking nervously, her gaze slicing through the darkness as if daring whatever lurked there to reveal itself. Her body was coiled and ready to spring, but the tension in her limbs betrayed a fear she refused to voice outright. Luna's ears twitched, nostrils flaring as she inhaled the night air. "It's not just the wind," she said, voice low, rough with warning. "Something's coming." Her stance shifted, fur bristling along her spine, eyes narrowing to slits that reflected a growing storm of uncertainty. Max growled, a deep guttural sound that vibrated through the earth beneath their paws. "I don't like this," he muttered, his voice cracking with age and apprehension. "We're not alone, they're out there." His gaze flicked toward the thicket, where shadows clung like cobwebs, waiting. Coda's heart pounded so fiercely it seemed to echo in his ears. The wildness within him stirred, a tempest barely restrained, as the scent of danger seeped into the clearing. He took a step forward, tail stiff, eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and dread. The revelation of his origins, the man Thomas's warnings, felt like a fragile shield, now crumbling under the weight of a new threat. The forest, which had once been his sanctuary, now felt like a cage tightening around him. "Who's there?" Coda demanded, his voice cracking with the strain of holding back a surge of panic. He snarled, a raw sound that was more wolf than dog, echoing through the trees like a challenge. "Show yourself." There was a pause, a pregnant silence that stretched taut, broken only by the distant howl of a lone wolf, haunting and forlorn. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Not human this time, but something else, a creature tall and lean, eyes glinting with a predatory intelligence that chilled Coda to his core. The newcomer's fur was mottled grey, blending seamlessly with the night, and their gaze locked onto Coda with an intensity that spoke of recognition and something darker, accusation. Luna stepped forward, positioning herself between Coda and the stranger, muscles coiled and ready. "What do you want?" she demanded, voice sharp as a blade. The grey figure's lips curled into a snarl. "He doesn't belong with you," the voice hissed, low and venomous. "He's one of us. You've been raising a wolf in a pack of dogs. It's dangerous for him and for all of you." Coda's chest heaved, a knot of fear and fury twisting inside him. The stranger's words struck like a blow, unraveling the fragile threads of trust and belonging he'd fought so hard to weave. "I'm not just a wolf," Coda snapped, claws digging into the earth. "I'm part of this pack. I am family." "But you're running from what you are," the figure spat, stepping closer, eyes blazing. "You can't escape the wild inside. It will tear you apart. Or worse, it will tear us all apart." The tension in their voice was a razor's edge, slicing through the night's heavy air. Bella's hackles rose, and she growled fiercely. "Enough! We decide what family means." Her gaze bore into the stranger, daring them to defy the pack's unity. "Coda is one of us." The newcomer's lips twisted into a bitter laugh. "You don't understand what you've taken in. The experiment, the hybrid. He's a weapon, an aberration. They'll come for him, and when they do, you'll be collateral damage." Max's eyes narrowed, his old wounds flaring with a sudden resolve. "We've faced threats before. We protect our own, no matter the cost." His voice was steady, but beneath it, a tremor of urgency. "But we need to prepare. This changes everything." Coda's mind raced, the storm inside him breaking free with a violent surge. For so long, he had clung to the pack's love as a lifeline, a shield against the loneliness of his past. Now, doubt flooded in, a tidal wave eroding the foundation of everything he believed. Could he really be safe here? Could they protect him from the darkness closing in? Suddenly, a sharp crack split the night, the snap of a branch under heavy footfall, and more figures emerged from the shadows, silent and purposeful. They were neither dogs nor wolves, but something engineered, something unnatural. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, cold and unfeeling. Thomas stepped forward, urgency lacing his voice. "They're here, the ones who want him back. We have to move, now." Panic surged through the pack. Luna barked sharply, "Gather together. We leave this place before they surround us." Coda's legs trembled, caught between flight and fight. His breath hitched as the reality of their situation slammed into him. The sanctuary was breached. The predator had become the prey. The wild call inside him roared louder, no longer a whisper, but a battle cry demanding release. "Wait!" Coda's voice cracked, desperate and raw. I can't just run. We need a plan. We can't let them take me. Take us without a fight. Bella's eyes met his, fierce and steady. Then we fight, together. The forest seemed to close in, the shadows twisting into snarling shapes, the air thick with the scent of impending violence. The pack tightened, muscles coiled, breath shallow and quick. The bonds forged in quiet moments of trust, now strained under the weight of fear and uncertainty. Koda's gaze flicked to the grey stranger, then back to his packmates. The line between friend and foe blurred, and the question that gnawed at his heart grew louder. Who could he truly trust? The man who had saved him, the dogs who raised him, or the wildness clawing at the edges of his soul? As the first steps of their pursuers cracked through the underbrush, the night erupted into chaos. The fragile peace shattered, replaced by a rush of adrenaline, the fierce pulse of survival, and the undeniable truth that nothing would ever be the same. The pack surged forward, a tempest of fur and determination, chasing the fading moonlight into the waiting darkness. And in that charged moment, beneath the restless stars, Koda understood that his journey was no longer about finding a place to belong. It was about claiming the right to be free, no matter the cost. The forest held its breath once more, but this time the calm was broken by the storm that had finally been unleashed. The first crackle of dry leaves underfoot had seemed like just another sound in the forest's restless symphony. But now, in the chaos that had erupted, it held a weight far heavier than the mere breaking of a branch. As the pack surged forward, muscles coiled and teeth bared, Koda's mind reeled, not just from the immediate threat pressing in around them, but from a sudden, sharp memory that clawed its way to the surface, unbidden and vivid. It was a fragment from his past, one shadowed and nearly forgotten until now. A cold, sterile room bathed in harsh fluorescent light, where a young man crouched behind a glass pane, clutching a faded photograph. The man's eyes, tired, haunted, had been fixed on him with an intensity that had unsettled even the wildness inside Koda. That man was Thomas. But the photograph, that small, crumpled piece of paper, was what truly pulled Koda back. It showed a family, a woman with a gentle smile, a child clutching a worn stuffed bear, and a dark-haired man whose face was etched with both hope and sorrow. Koda had seen it once, briefly in the man's trembling hands, but the meaning had slipped past him like a ghost. Now, as the adrenaline surged, the pieces clicked into place, unraveling a thread tangled deep in the past. Thomas was not just a stranger who had found him in the forest. He was a man haunted by loss, by a family fractured long before Koda's escape. The child in the photograph, his daughter, had vanished years ago, swallowed by the same cold machinery that had captured Koda. The research facility, the experiments, the cages, they were all part of a shadowed web that had ensnared both their lives, binding them in ways neither had fully grasped. Koda's breath hitched, the revelation crashing through him with the force of a storm. The man who had come to save him was also running from ghosts, ghosts that had shaped the very nightmare Koda had fled. And in this tangled history, Koda saw reflected his own fractured identity, a creature caught between worlds, marked by forces beyond his control. Meanwhile, Luna's fierce gaze scanned the darkening forest, her protective instincts sharpening as the pack's tension thickened. Yet beneath her fierce exterior, a flicker of vulnerability now seemed to seep through, an echo of a secret she had carried in silence. In the quiet moments before the attack, she had found a small, silver locket, half buried beneath the moss near the clearing. It was delicate, engraved with a symbol she recognized but had never spoken of, the emblem of the research facility that had haunted their nights since Koda's arrival. The locket's presence was no accident. It was a silent message, a tether linking the pack's sanctuary to the cold, clinical world waiting beyond the forest's edge. Luna's mind spiraled. How long had this connection existed? Had the pack unknowingly sheltered more than just a lost pup? Had the shadows of that facility crept closer all along, threading their way through the very ground beneath them? As the pack regrouped, Bella's sharp eyes caught something else. A small, nearly invisible device clipped beneath Koda's fur, hidden among the dark strands. It wasn't just a tracking implant, as Thomas had warned. It was more sophisticated, designed to monitor not only location but biological responses: heartbeat, stress, even neural activity. The realization hit with a cold clarity. Coda's every move, every breath had been watched, controlled in ways the pack hadn't fully understood. The device pulsed faintly, a soft blue glow barely perceptible in the moonlight. Bella's hackles rose as she nudged Coda gently. The question unspoken but clear: had the wolf pup ever truly been free? Or had the pack's love been a fragile veil over a cage far more insidious? Coda's heart thundered as he tore at the device, claws scraping desperately against fur and skin. But it clung stubbornly, a cruel reminder that the past was not so easily shed. The pack watched silently, the weight of their shared fear pressing down like the night itself. Thomas stepped forward, his voice low but steady, carrying the burden of truth. They designed him to be a bridge between wolf and dog, wild and tame, but that bridge is a weapon. They want to control not just his body, but what he represents. You're not just protecting a pup, you're standing against a force that sees life as data, as experiment. Max growled softly, eyes narrowing. Then we're more than just defenders of the pack. We're guardians of something they don't understand, something they fear. The gray stranger, the one who had appeared from the shadows moments before, stepped closer, their gaze flickering between Coda and the pack. How you think you can protect him here? The wild inside him is a storm waiting to break. And when it does, it won't just be the hunters you have to fear, it'll be the wolf within. Coda's mind spiraled, torn between the love he had received and the wild blood that surged beneath. The stranger's words were no longer threats but warnings, echoes of a truth he had barely dared to face. His nature was both his strength and his curse. In that moment, a memory surfaced, Bella's earlier question about the mask Coda wore, the lessons learned, the playful mimicry that had once felt like belonging. But now, with the weight of the device and the hidden past pressing down, Coda saw it anew, not as a betrayal, but as survival, a fragile dance between worlds. And yet, beneath the pack's fierce loyalty and the man's desperate hope, a fracture deepened. Thomas's eyes lingered on Coda, with an intensity that blurred the line between protector and prisoner. There was something unsaid, a secret pact perhaps, or a debt owed, something that cast long shadows over their alliance. The forest seemed to hold its breath as these threads tangled tighter. The pack's unity, once a fortress, now felt like a fragile web, strained by hidden truths and shifting loyalties. Coda stood at the center, caught in a storm of identity and allegiance that threatened to tear him apart. As the moon traced silver lines across the trembling leaves, the realization settled like frost on the soul. The journey ahead was not just about escape or survival. It was about uncovering the truths buried deep beneath the surface, truths that would challenge everything Coda thought he knew about family, freedom, and himself. And in that charged silence, beneath the watchful stars, the lines between friend and foe blurred, the past and present collided, and the true nature of the fight revealed itself, not as a battle of strength, but as a war for the soul. The forest had fallen into an uneasy quiet, a stillness that pressed down like a physical weight against Coda's ribs. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant smoke, but even those familiar markers felt muted, as if the world itself had gone dim, leaving him suspended in a hushed void. His paws rested on cold soil, but the ground beneath him felt unsteady, as though it might give way at any moment. A flicker of moonlight broke through the canopy, briefly illuminating the tangled shadows that had become the borders of his uncertain world. Coda's breath came uneven, shallow yet jagged, as if each inhale scraped raw edges inside his chest. The pack had scattered after the sudden onslaught, their courage fading with the retreat of safety. Luna, Max, and Bella had vanished into the dark maze of trees, leaving him alone at the heart of a fractured sanctuary. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a hollow echo, a cavernous gap where trust had once lived. He lowered his head, ears flattening against the ache pulsing through his skull. The tracking device, now removed but not forgotten, had been a cruel reminder that freedom was a fragile illusion. Every step he had taken had been watched, every heartbeat catalogued, as if he were nothing more than a specimen trapped in a cage of flesh and fur. His reflection in a nearby pool, distorted by ripples, showed eyes that bore the wildness of the forest, but also the deep scars of captivity. The revelation that Thomas was not just a stranger, but a man haunted by his own losses, added a bitter layer to the tangled web of survival. It made Coda question everything: his place in the pack, the sincerity of their loyalty, even the meaning of freedom itself. Had the love he'd known been a shield or a lie? Were the bonds forged in this forest enough to protect him from the darkness that pursued? A sudden sound, a twig snapping underfoot, snapped Coda's head up. His muscles tensed, instincts primed for flight or fight. But the figure that stepped into the moonlight was not an enemy. It was Thomas, his face etched with exhaustion and pain, eyes searching Coda's with a tenderness that betrayed the weight of unspoken truths. "We can't stay here," Thomas said quietly, voice rough but resolute. "They'll come again, and next time it won't just be hunters in the shadows, it'll be the full force of the facility. You have to decide, fight with us, or run into the wild and face it alone." Coda's ears twitched, torn between the raw pull of the wild and the fragile tether of companionship. The pack's faces flickered in his mind: Luna's fierce protectiveness, Max's steady strength, Bella's sharp vigilance, all reminders of a family that had cradled his broken spirit, yet the weight of Thomas's words settled like ice in his veins. To stay meant war, to flee meant exile. His paws scraped the earth as the forest seemed to close in, branches reaching like grasping fingers, shadows pooling like ink. The line between safety and danger blurred until it vanished altogether. Coda lowered his gaze, the world narrowing to the faint glow of the pool at his feet. "I can't." His voice was barely a whisper, fragmented, as if the words themselves were too heavy to bear. "I don't know who I am anymore." The reflection rippled again, distorting his image until it was unrecognizable, a creature caught between two worlds, belonging nowhere and everywhere at once. The wild inside him throbbed with restless hunger, while the memory of the pack's warmth burned like a fading ember. Thomas's presence was steady, but even he seemed fragile, as if carrying the weight of 1,000 broken promises. "You're more than what they made you," he said softly. "But that means nothing if you don't choose who you want to be." Coda's tail twitched, a small, involuntary movement that betrayed the storm raging beneath his calm facade. He wanted to believe in the pack, in the family that had saved him from loneliness and fear, but the truth was a blade slicing through the fabric of his heart. The world outside was closing in, and the sanctuary of the forest was no longer a refuge, but a trap. He rose slowly, limbs heavy with the weight of decision. The moonlight flickered as a breeze stirred the leaves, the silence punctuated only by his ragged breathing and the distant call of a lone owl, a sound both mournful and resolute. "Stay," Luna's voice echoed in his memory, soft, fierce, unwavering, the promise of protection, the unspoken vow of loyalty. But beneath that promise lay a fracture as deep as the forest roots, a crack that threatened to swallow them all. Coda's gaze lifted to the sky, stars shimmering cold and distant like shards of broken dreams. The path ahead was obscured by shadows, but the choice was clear. He could no longer linger in the liminal space between past and present, wild and tame, captivity and freedom. The line had been crossed. A low growl rose from his throat, raw and primal, an acceptance, a defiance, a farewell to innocence. The wolf and the dog within him stirred together, forging a new identity born of pain, love, and unyielding resolve. He turned away from the pool, the reflection fading like a ghost, and stepped forward into the unknown. The forest swallowed his form, the night embracing him with cold certainty. There was no turning back. The journey toward the storm had begun. The night's chill cut sharper now, as if the forest itself sensed the turning tide. Coda stood at the edge of the clearing, the weight of everything pressing into his ribs like a stone. His breath steamed in the cold air, ragged and unsteady, but beneath the surface, a fierce resolve began to coalesce, a quiet fire that had been smoldering beneath the chaos and doubt. This was the moment he could no longer linger in shadows or hesitation. The path ahead demanded a choice, and he would face it on his terms. Behind him, the soft padding of paws signaled the cautious return of Luna, Max, and Bella. Their faces bore the exhaustion of battle and the shadow of what had been lost, but their eyes held something else, a tentative hope, fragile yet unwavering. Luna's gaze locked with his, steady and fierce. "We can't keep running, Coda. You have to decide. Fight with us, or disappear into the wild alone. There's no middle ground anymore." Coda's jaw clenched. The memories of sterile cages and whispered experiments swirling like ghosts in his mind. The truth of his origins had shattered his illusions, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had sharpened the edges of his identity. Part wolf, part dog, part something neither science nor fear could define. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a force awakening. "I'm not running," Coda said, his voice low but resolute. "Not anymore. They've hunted me as a prize, a weapon. But I'm neither. I'm me. And I'll fight to keep that." Max stepped closer, the old dog's grizzled face softening with a rare, approving nod. "Good, because it's not just your fight now, it's ours. But we need a plan. Something more than running into the dark hoping we'll survive." Bella circled, eyes sharp and calculating. "We can't stay here. They'll track us down with those devices. We need to draw them away, buy time, but it means splitting up." Coda's ears twitched at the implication. Separation was a risk, a fracture in the fragile bond that had kept them whole, yet he understood the necessity. The pack's survival depended on sacrifice, on the willingness to let go of what was safest, to protect what was most precious. He swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "Then I'll take the lead," he said, stepping forward into the moonlight. "I'm the one they want. If I can draw them away, you can disappear. Find safety. Protect the pack." Luna's lips parted in protest, but Coda raised a paw, silencing her gently. "I won't lose you again," he promised, voice raw with emotion. "This time it's different. I'm not the scared pup they found. I'm ready." The forest seemed to hold its breath as Coda moved toward the shadows, the silver light casting long, wavering shapes that stretched like fingers reaching for him. Each step was a crossing of a threshold, a symbolic shedding of the past and an embrace of the uncertain future. The clearing behind him felt smaller, the bonds tightening even as distance grew. Suddenly, a harsh bark shattered the silence. Thomas's voice, urgent and strained. "Coda, wait. There's something you need to know. They're not just hunters. They've sent reinforcements, more than we expected. This fight will change everything." Coda paused, the warning slicing through his resolve like a blade. But instead of faltering, his eyes narrowed, burning with a fierce light. "Then I won't face it alone," he said, turning back to meet Thomas's gaze. "We face it together, all of us." Luna stepped beside him, her presence a shield and a promise. Max growled softly, and Bella's tail flicked with fierce determination. The pack was whole again, but the net was tightening. The world outside the forest was mobilizing, closing in like a storm. Coda's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the unyielding pulse of agency. The choice had been made. The line crossed. There was no turning back. As the first pale light of dawn brushed the horizon, the forest seemed to whisper a final warning. The calm before the inevitable collision. The wolf raised by dogs was no longer a shadow in the night. He was a reckoning, and his story was about to be written in blood, loyalty, and the fierce claim of freedom. The forest held its breath, the air thick with a silence so profound it pressed against their skin like a weight. Moonlight seeped weakly through the canopy, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to stretch and flicker with every trembling leaf. The usual chorus of night sounds, the rustle of small creatures, the distant hoot of an owl, had all but vanished, swallowed by the oppressive stillness. Time itself felt fractured, each heartbeat stretched into an eternity, each breath a fragile tether to the world. Coda stood at the edge of the clearing, muscles coiled tight beneath his fur, eyes sharp and unblinking. The pack surrounded him, a circle of silent guardians whose faces bore the scars of countless battles, yet now showed a vulnerability rarely glimpsed. Luna's amber eyes, usually fierce with protective fire, now shimmered with a quiet fear that refused to be named. Max's grizzled muzzle twitched as his gaze swept the dark woods, nostrils flaring with the scent of menace just beyond reach. Bella's lithe form was motionless, ears flattened in tense anticipation, her sharp gaze flickering between the shadows and Coda's restless figure. Words had become scarce, swallowed by the weight of the moment. When they spoke, it was in hushed fragments, half-formed thoughts hanging in the air like fragile glass, threatening to shatter with the slightest touch. Luna's voice broke the silence once, a whisper, heavy with unspoken dread. "They're coming. Soon." No one argued. No one dared. Coda's jaw clenched, the muscles taut as if restraining a storm that threatened to explode from within. His gaze dropped to the earth, tracing the brittle leaves scattered beneath his paws. Each one seemed to crackle with tension, a brittle echo of the fragile peace they had known. The wolf inside him stirred restlessly, a silent howl pressed tight behind teeth. Yet the pack's warmth, the bond forged through hardship, held him anchored, though only barely. Thomas lingered at the edge of the circle, his face drawn and pale in the moonlight, his eyes flicked between Coda and the surrounding trees, haunted by memories and the weight of impossible choices. He swallowed hard, throat dry, as if the words he needed to say were trapped beneath a barricade of fear. Finally, he managed, "We don't have much time. They're closer than before." The statement hung in the air, a cold blade slicing through the fragile calm. A long pause followed, thick with the unsaid. Bella's tail twitched sharply, a silent signal of rising tension. The pack's breaths came quick and shallow now, the rhythm erratic as though the night itself had become a cage, constricting tighter with every passing second. Coda shifted his weight, ears flicking toward every distant sound, every rustle that might herald the approaching storm. The forest seemed to contract, the trees leaning inward as if conspiring to trap them in this moment of suspended terror. Shadows deepened, swallowing the edges of vision, blurring the boundary between safety and peril. The moon's pale glow faltered behind a swift-moving cloud, leaving the clearing bathed in near-total darkness. In that void, the silence grew deafening. Luna's gaze locked with Coda's in a moment that spoke volumes without a single word. A shared understanding flickered between them, of fear held in check, of loyalty tested beyond limits, of the fragile thread upon which their future now balanced. Max exhaled a low rumble, part warning, part prayer, as if willing the night to hold just a little longer. Coda's paws scraped the earth, a restless rhythm that matched the storm building inside him. He wanted to run, to howl, to tear through the suffocating quiet, but the pack's presence rooted him, their unspoken trust both a shield and a chain. His tail flicked once, a brief sign of defiance before stillness reclaimed him. The distant crackle of a breaking twig shattered the fragile spell, snapping all eyes toward the dark line of trees. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt, the air pulsing with dangerous electricity. Then, nothing. Only the heavy silence resumed, deeper now, as if the forest itself was holding its breath for what was to come. No one moved, no one spoke. The moment stretched taut, an unbearable pause before the inevitable storm. And in that stillness, beneath the shrouded moon, the pack waited. Silent, tense, and unbroken, on the edge of everything. The night shattered with a single, desperate howl, raw, guttural, and wrenching the silence apart. Coda's body convulsed as the sound tore from deep within, a primal scream that bled every ounce of pain. Betrayal and wild fury he had buried beneath layers of loyalty and fear. His legs buckled, he collapsed onto the cold earth, trembling uncontrollably as the heavy weight of revelation crushed his chest. Thomas knelt beside him, eyes wide with a mixture of sorrow and helplessness. "Coda, please, listen." "No!" Coda's voice cracked, a savage edge slicing through the night. "You lied to me. You all lied." His eyes blazed with tears he refused to shed, burning with the fire of shattered trust. "You said I was family, that I belonged. But you never told me the truth." His claws dug into the soil, ripping at roots as if trying to unearth every buried secret. Luna stepped forward, her voice trembling yet fierce. "We raised you, protected you, not because of what you were made to be, but because of who you are. Who I am, Koda spat, shaking his head like a storm-tossed leaf. I'm a test subject, a weapon, a hybrid. You sheltered a lie. His breath hitched, the dam breaking as sobs racked his frame. I trusted you. I wanted to be one of you. But how can I, when the very core of me is built on lies and cages? Bella's eyes softened, but her voice held steady. You are more than their experiments, more than their control. You're Koda. But what if that's not enough? Koda's cry fractured the night. He pushed himself upright, pacing like a caged storm. What if I'm doomed to be hunted, to be feared, to never truly belong anywhere? Max's grizzled face bore the weight of silent years, and now his voice was rough but resolute. Belonging isn't about the blood or the past, it's about what you fight for, what you protect. You have a choice. Koda stopped, eyes piercing the darkness as if searching for an answer hidden in the shadows. Choice. The word trembled on his lips, fragile as a spider's web in a tempest. Thomas's hands shook as he pulled from his pocket a folded photograph, worn, creased, but unmistakably a family. This, he whispered, is why I've fought to keep you alive, my daughter. She was taken by the same people who made you. I saw in you a chance for redemption, a hope that their cruelty wouldn't be the final word. The photo slipped from his fingers like a fallen leaf, fluttering to the ground between them. Koda stared, the shards of his fragmented identity piercing deeper than any wound. So I'm their mistake, he breathed, voice breaking. A symbol of their sins and your hope. Luna's paw reached for his, steady and unyielding. You're not a mistake. You're our fight, our family. But Koda shook her off, tears spilling free now, raw and unhidden. I can't live between two worlds anymore. Wild and tame, love and fear, freedom and captivity. His voice grew hoarse with anguish. I have to choose, to be something or nothing at all. The forest seemed to close in, the night swallowing their cries, their truths laid bare and bleeding. Koda's chest heaved as he fell to his knees once more, the fragile veneer of control shattered utterly. I'm done running from the past, from who I am, from what I'm supposed to be. He looked up, eyes fierce and blazing with newfound clarity. I will fight, not just to survive, but to be me. No more masks, no more lies. In that moment, the pack's silent vigil broke, their collective breath a storm of hope and fear. The line had been crossed. The wolf raised by dogs was no longer a shadow hiding in the night. He was a reckoning, fierce and unrelenting. The night held its breath, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. The cold forest night had softened into dawn's gentle hush, the shadows retreating like whispered secrets carried away by the morning breeze. Koda stood at the edge of the clearing once more, but this time, the weight pressing on his shoulders felt different, less like a cage and more like a mantle. His breath, visible in the crisp air, rose and fell steadily, no longer ragged but measured, as if he had finally found a rhythm between the wild and the tame that pulsed within him. The moon, which had watched silently through his journey, now faded behind the pale light of day, leaving behind a sky brushed with soft hues of lavender and gold. The forest around him seemed transformed too, no longer a realm of lurking dangers and fractured loyalties, but a mosaic of raw beauty and resilience. Every leaf, every blade of grass, carried the echoes of his past struggles and the quiet promise of what still lay ahead. Koda's gaze drifted to the trio beside him, Luna, Max, and Bella. Their faces bore the fatigue of battles fought and losses mourned, but in their eyes glimmered a steadfast loyalty that had deepened beyond the bounds of mere survival. They were no longer just a pack that had sheltered a confused wolf pup. They were a family forged in fire and shadow, tempered by pain yet unbroken. The lines between dog and wolf, human and wild, had blurred into something richer, something fiercely, painfully real. He thought back to that cold night when his howl had first sliced through the forest. A sound neither fully dog nor fully wolf, but a cry of a soul caught between worlds. How different it seemed now, that raw, uncertain call. It had been a plea for belonging, for understanding, and perhaps for forgiveness. Tonight, beneath the newborn light, it felt more like a song of survival, a testament to a journey not yet complete, but no longer burdened by doubt. Memories surged, of Thomas's haunted eyes and whispered truths, the sterile cages that had sought to define him, and the gentle nudges of the dogs who had offered him something no experiment ever could: love. Those moments of kindness, once fragile and tentative, now shone with undeniable strength. They were the roots anchoring his fractured spirit, even as the wild blood within him stirred with restless energy. Coda lowered his head, nose brushing against the cool earth, feeling the pulse of life beneath his paws. The forest breathed with him, a living tapestry woven from shadows and light, pain and hope. The scars he carried, both visible and hidden, were no longer marks of shame but badges of survival, reminders that identity is never fixed but ever shifting, as fluid and untamed as the wilderness itself. Luna stepped closer, her presence a quiet reassurance. "You're not just part of this pack, Coda," she murmured, voice soft but unwavering. "You're part of this world, and it's better for it." Coda's eyes met hers, and in that gaze, the fragile threads of fear and uncertainty unraveled into something new. Acceptance, not just from others but from himself. The journey ahead remained uncertain, the dangers beyond the forest as real as ever. But within him burned a fierce resolve, a readiness to face whatever storms might come, with the fierce loyalty of a pack and the wild heart of a wolf. As he turned to step deeper into the forest's embrace, the wind stirred the leaves one last time, carrying with it a whisper, a memory of that first confused howl, now transformed into a song of belonging and strength. If this story moved you, if Coda's journey stirred something deep inside, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in his place? How do you find balance between the parts of yourself that seem at odds? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the heart's wild terrain. Thank you for walking this path with us.